फ्लाई कर रहा होता है, वहीं से रेस्क्यू करना है, वहीं पर हो सकता है उन्हें पैराड्रॉप होना हो। तो इन लहरों से न तो उन्हें घबराना है, किस तरीके से अगर क्रैश हो जाए, अगर उसके जरिए उसके साथ वो इस पानी में गिर जाए तो किस तरह से वहां से खुद को बचाकर निकलना है, बाकी सामान को निकालना है, इन सारी चीजों की यहां पर ये ट्रेनिंग। ये हिलोरे मारता पानी, तेज हवाएं, कड़कती बिजली, पर समुद्र में इन परिस्थितियों की गुंजाइश असली है। इसीलिए इन सैनिकों को ये बेहद जटिल ट्रेनिंग दी जाती है। इस ट्रेनिंग का मकसद क्या है और कौन अंडरगो करता है ये ट्रेनिंग?
2003 में एक इंसिडेंट हुआ था, उसका एनालिसिस में हमने ये कोशिश की थी क्यों एयरक्रू सब बाहर नहीं आया तो कैसे ट्रेनिंग कर सकता है। उसके तरह से हमने एक ट्रेनिंग मॉडिफाई किया था। वो मॉडिफिकेशन ऐसे एयरक्राफ्ट से बाहर सिर्फ निकलना नहीं है, पूरा इक्विपमेंट के साथ निकलना है और मैक्सिमम टाइम सर्वाइव करना है। उसके लिए हमने ये ट्रेनिंग शुरू की थी। 2003 में हमने ये शुरू किए थे प्रोजेक्ट का। ये कंप्लीट हुआ, 2013 में कमीशन हुआ, 2015 में हमने ट्रेनिंग शुरू की।
ड्यूरेशन होता है सर इस ट्रेनिंग?
ये ट्रेनिंग हम मैक्सिमम 3 डेज का ट्रेनिंग होता है, बिकॉज हेलीकॉप्टर्स के लिए हेलीकॉप्टर टॉपल हो जाएगा क्योंकि उसका इंजन है, एमजीबी है, इसलिए हेलीकॉप्टर टॉपल हो जाएगा और फिक्स विंग में टॉपल नहीं होगा। सो हमने इनिशियली उसको ब्रीथिंग का ट्रेनिंग देते हैं क्योंकि नॉर्मल ह्यूमन बीइंग को 45 सेकेंड तक लंग्स में हवा रह सकता है। सो हम इनिशियल ट्रेनिंग हम शैलो वाटर में करते हैं मैक्सिमम एयर होल्डिंग के लिए। उसके बाद हम शुरू करते हैं विथ नो वेदर कंडीशन के, मिनिमम डिफिकल्टी के साथ।
देख के ही ये जो ट्रेनिंग है वो सिर्फ मुश्किल नहीं बल्कि बहुत खतरनाक लगती है। पर पहली बार पानी के नीचे वैसे जाने में वाकई खतरनाक वाली फीलिंग आती है जितने भी ट्रेनिंग्स जाते हैं नीचे।
इनिशियल स्टेज में तो ये फीलिंग आती है, उससे डर लगता है, थोड़ा अंडर कॉन्फिडेंस होता है, लेकिन जैसे जैसे हम ट्रेनिंग देते हैं स्टेप बाय स्टेप हम उसका डिफिकल्टी लेवल को इंक्रीज करते हैं। फर्स्ट स्टेप में उसे हम पहले शैलो वाटर में उसको कंफर्टेबल करवाते हैं, फैमिलराइज कराते हैं जैसे कि अंडर वाटर में उसकी चीज़ें कैसे लगेंगी। जैसे ही वो शैलो वाटर में कंफर्टेबल हो जाता है देन हम उसे डीप जोन में लेके जाते हैं।
गगनयान की ट्रेनिंग में भी आप लोगों का योगदान रहा?
या नेवी इज अ लीड सर्विस है गगनयान का रिकवरी मॉड्यूल प्रोग्राम में। सो सभी रिकवरी टीम का ट्रेनिंग इधर ही होगा। एस्ट्रोनॉट्स का भी सी सर्वाइवल ट्रेनिंग हम इधर ही करेंगे और सभी क्रू मॉड्यूल है, क्रू मॉड्यूल का कंट्रोल एनवायरनमेंट टेस्टिंग यही फैसिलिटी में करेंगे। इधर प्रूव होने के बाद उसके एक्चुअल सी में हम टेस्ट करेंगे। सो पूरा गगनयान मिशन में WSTF एक पार्ट है और नेवी लीड सर्विस है रिकवरी में।
ऐसी भयंकर परिस्थितियों के लिए तैयार रहना एक पहलू है, नेवी में फ्लाइंग की एक और कठिन चुनौती है और वो है नाइट फ्लाइंग। नेवल एविएशन की अपनी चुनौतियां हैं, लेकिन जो प्रशिक्षण है वो उन सारी चीजों के लिए तैयार भी कराता है। अब ये एक बेहद अंधेरा सा कमरा आप देख रहे होंगे और इसका एक खास मकसद भी है, वो है रात के समय में फ्लाइंग। किन चीजों पर खास करके ध्यान दे रहे हैं?
जब हम नाइट फ्लाइंग की बात करते हैं, व्हेन द पायलट गेट्स सम गुड अबाउट ऑफ क्वालिटी ऑफ फ्लाइंग, ही प्रोग्रेसेस इनटू नाइट फ्लाइंग गॉगल्स और नाइट फ्लाइंग विजन फ्लाइंग, जिसमें जब फुल डार्क नाइट कंडीशन होता है उस कंडीशन में विद दिस नाइट फ्लाइंग गॉगल्स इट आर्ग्यूमेंट्स द पायलट, जो उसका विजन है उसको एनहांस करता है, ताकि अगर पूरे जब मून का फेस बहुत ही कम है, एम्बिएंट लाइट बहुत ही कम है, ही विल बी एबल टू सी थ्रू द नाइट फ्लाइंग गॉगल्स एंड डू हिज बेसिक नाइट फ्लाइंग। एंड उसको पता नहीं चलेगा, वो इतना ब्राइट रहता है जैसे फ्लाई करता है, इट गो टू गिव हिम अ लॉट ऑफ सिचुएशनल अवेयरनेस, जैसे उसको पूरा दिखेगा लाइक अ डे।
इसमें एक चीज बहुत अहम है देखना, वो ये कि एक तरफ आप सामने देख रहे हैं, लेकिन उसके साथ ही आप जब अपने इस पैनल को देखते हैं तो डिस्टेंस विजन का बदल जाता है।
करेक्ट। सो द जो गॉगल्स होता है, पायलट फोकस टू द इन्फिनिटी, बहुत दूर के लिए फोकस करता है ताकि उसको दूर के चीज को अच्छे से दिखे। नाउ द पायलट ऑल्सो हैज टू लुक इनसाइड फॉर हिज पैरामीटर्स की जो उसका वैल्यूज, जो स्पीड है, बाकी जो पैरामीटर्स है सही आ रहा है कि नहीं। फॉर दैट द पायलट कीप्स हिज एनवीजी इन अ सर्टेन पोजीशन विद रिस्पेक्ट टू हिज आईज, सो दैट वो अपने गैप से आपको उसको इंस्ट्रूमेंट भी दिखे, एट द सेम टाइम जब वो थ्रू देखेगा उसको बाहर उसका मिशन भी वो कर पाएगा।
भले ही तमाम तरह के आधुनिक उपकरण आ जाएं, लेकिन नाइट फ्लाइंग जो होती है, सूरज ढलने के बाद जो उड़ान भरी जाती है, उसकी अपनी ही अलग चुनौतियां होती हैं। और इस तरह से लगातार प्रशिक्षण के जरिए ही न केवल एक पायलट बल्कि उसके इर्द गिर्द जितने भी लोग जुड़े रहते हैं वो सब इसमें दुरुस्त होते हैं। हम आपको समझाते हैं कि एक नेवल एविएटर के लिए रात के समय उड़ान भरने के साथ कौन कौन सी चुनौतियां होती हैं। नाइट फ्लाइंग की क्या चुनौतियां होती हैं?
नाइट फ्लाइंग अगर आप इंडियन नेवी के पर्सपेक्टिव से देखेंगे, नॉर्मल पायलट्स जो बाकी लैंड के ऊपर फ्लाई करते हैं उनके पास बहुत सारे विजुअल क्यूज रहते हैं, लाइट रहती है पूरे जमीन के ऊपर। बट जब हम समुंदर के ऊपर फ्लाई करते हैं वहाँ पे कोई लाइट नहीं रहती है। एंड इन केस ऑफ अ लिट अनलिट नाइट आपको समुंदर और आसमान में अंतर नहीं पता चलेगा। क्षितिज जिसे होराइजन बोलते हैं वो दिन में हमें क्लियरली दिखाई देता है, रात को सी मर्जेस इनटू द स्काई, तो उसमें डिसओरिएंटेशन के चांसेस बहुत ज़्यादा होते हैं। एंड एज नेवल पायलट्स हमें रात को लो फ्लाइंग भी करनी पड़ती है, 200 फीट 500 फीट, सो उसमें चैलेंजेस उतने ही ज़्यादा बढ़ जाते हैं।
बहरहाल रात के अंधेरे हो या दिन के उजाले, जो एक टीम दिन रात इनका साथ देती है, इनके साथ डटी रहती है, वो है एटीसी। तो एक तरह से कहा जा सकता है कि ये सबसे व्यस्त विभाग है जहां पर हम हैं। जितने भी विमान यहां से टेक ऑफ कर रहे हैं, लैंड कर रहे हैं, किसी भी मिशन के लिए निकल रहे हैं, एटीसी है जो सबको जानता है। लेकिन ये एक नेवल बेस होने के बावजूद यहाँ पर एक एयरफोर्स ऑफिसर हम देख रहे हैं सर, क्या integration of services?
It's a part of the integration, ma'am. I am understanding the new projects which are coming up, Navi, runway resurfacing, and my experience I am equally sharing with Navy. So I am very good working over INS Garuda. I am finding it very comfortable. So probably you will find more integration between the forces in the future.
क्या क्या करते हैं यहाँ पर, क्या क्या रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज हैं पूरी टीम की?
मैं यहाँ पे एक एयर ट्रैफिक कंट्रोलर हूँ। जैसे कि आप देख सकते हैं यहाँ पे एक टार कंट्रोलर है और एक यहाँ पे अप्रोच कंट्रोलर है। देयर इज अ वैरायटी ऑफ एयरक्राफ्ट ऑपरेटिंग फ्रॉम हियर। अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट वी आर कोऑर्डिनेटिंग फॉर वीवीआईपी एंड वीआईपी मूवमेंट्स ऑल्सो, which are not only from within the country but also from the friendly foreign nations.
बहुत जिम्मेदारी का काम है, मतलब हर एक उड़ान के लिए आप लोग जिम्मेदार हो जाते हैं। एक तो ये कि उस जिम्मेदारी का एहसास कितना है, और दूसरा उसके लिए माइंड कितना आप लोगों को स्ट्रांग रखना होता है।
जैसे ही वो हेडसेट मैं पहनती हूँ तो मुझे ये एहसास होता है कि मैं बाकी सब भूल जाऊँ और सिर्फ मेरा यही नेतृत्व है कि मैं जो भी एयरक्राफ्ट यहाँ से उड़ के जा रहा है, किसी भी असिस्टेंस के लिए जा रहा है, उसको मैं घर वापस सही और सुरक्षा हालत में लेके आऊँ।
तो यहाँ की जिम्मेदारी मुख्य तौर पर क्या है?
ये ये एक रेडार कंट्रोल रूम है। यहाँ से जनरली जो एयरक्राफ्ट एंड एयर होते हैं उनको हम रेडार से कंट्रोल करते हैं। कुछ मेजर चीज़ें जो हमने यहाँ देखी हैं, 2000 फ्लड्स हुए थे, वाज ए मेजर इशू, एंड रिसेंटली देयर वाज ब्रह्मपुरम फायर। इन दैट वी रिक्वायर्ड, हमने हमारे जो एयरक्राफ्ट हैं जो कैपेबल हैं इन चीज़ों के लिए, हमने उनको भेजा, बट जो स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं वो सब मेंटेन नहीं होते हैं, तो वो सिचुएशन अलग ही होती है जहां आपको मिशन भी कंप्लीट करना है, उनके बीच में उनको सेफ भी रखना है, और एरिया इतना होता नहीं है कि जहां हम सारे स्टैंडर्ड्स मेंटेन कर पाएँ। सो वो अपने आप में एक डिफरेंट फील एट दैट टाइम।
चूंकि हम नेवल एविएशन के हर किरदार को समझते परखते आगे बढ़ रहे थे, इस कार्रवाई ने भी हमारा ध्यान खींचा। आप एक बेफिक्र उड़ान तभी भर सकते हैं जब आपको मालूम हो कि आपके पीछे एक पूरी की पूरी टीम है जो आपके लिए तैनात है, और ये जो टीमें हैं इनकी किरदार, इनकी भूमिकाओं को बहुत सोच समझकर और पूरी तत्परता से जिस तरह से तैयार किया जाता है, हम इस क्रैश टीम कहें सर, इसके बारे में अगर हम समझें कि क्या इनकी भूमिका है, 24 घंटे तैयार रहते हैं सर।
कि मैम अगर कोई फ्लाइंग होनी है, बीट सिविल फ्लाइंग और मिलिट्री फ्लाइंग, सो अगर CFTs हमारे पास नहीं है, अगर क्रैश क्रू नहीं है, तो फ्लाइंग नहीं हो सकती, वो भले भले कहीं भी हो वो। सो जब भी फ्लाइंग चलती है, ये क्रैश क्रू है, दीज आर क्रैश फायर टेंडर्स, जो रेड कलर ट्रक्स है, so they man this fire trucks, crash fire tenders throughout the duration of flying. They man it and they are always ready. The moment some siren is sounded, the moment ATC से पता लगता है कि there's some emergency which has happened, aircraft is coming with emergency, the same time they will move out, सब वहाँ से निकलेंगे and they'll respond to that emergency. यहाँ पे ये लोग AFPS suit है, which is a very heavy suit, वो पहन के अंदर सब बैठे रहते हैं. And when they go to the scene of अगर कोई crash हो जाता है, if there's a fire, then these people they literally go into the fire, आग के अंदर जाके वो लोग बचा के लाते हैं, जो भी crew है, passenger है, उनको वो लोग बचा के लाते हैं. Then they carry out the firefighting of that aircraft. And unlike a normal fire, aircraft fire में there's aviation fuel involved. So the magnitude of fire is huge, बहुत बड़ा होता है. So these people they fight that fire.
तो आप सबके मोटिवेशन का लेवल समझ सकते हैं, वो स्तर समझ सकते हैं कि किस हद तक वो मोटिवेटेड रहते हैं, इसीलिए तैयार रहते हैं इतनी मुश्किलों के भीतर से जाकर भी बचाव कार्य को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए। टैक्टिक्स और एयर नेविगेशन के लिए जो ये सिम्युलेटर है यहाँ पर 2020 में शुरुआत इसकी हुई, और हम आपको लेकर चलते हैं और दिखाते हैं कि दरअसल इससे किस तरीके से चीज़ें बेहतर होती हैं और सरल होती जाती हैं, क्योंकि यहाँ पर बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं, इसे हम समझ लेते हैं सर एग्जैक्टली क्या क्या चीज़ें कैसे कैसे बताया जा रहा है।
जैसे कि आप देख सकते हैं ये ट्रेनिंग VR ट्रेनिंग मॉड्यूल पे ट्रेनिंग कर रहा है। ये इन हाउस डिजाइन किया गया है डॉनियर एयरक्राफ्ट के एक्सटर्नल्स एवं एंटीना लेआउट के बारे में सीखने के लिए। ये एक ट्रेनिंग स्टेशन है, इस पे ट्रेनी रूट नेविगेशन बाय डे कर रहे हैं। ये फ्लाइट ट्रेनिंग डिवाइस CRM ट्रेनिंग यानी क्रू रिसोर्स मैनेजमेंट ट्रेनिंग ट्रेनीज को इम्बार्ट करने के लिए इस्तेमाल की जाती है। जैसे कि आप देख सकते हैं ये एक एग्जैक्ट डॉनियर 228 एयरक्राफ्ट का कॉकपिट लेआउट है। इसके सारे इक्विपमेंट और स्विचेस एज पर एयरक्राफ्ट इसमें फिटेड हैं। सो सारे ट्रेनीज एयरक्राफ्ट पे फ्लाई करने से पहले इस FTD डिवाइस पे एयरक्राफ्ट के सारे सिस्टम्स और उनके रिस्पेक्टिव स्विच के पोजीशंस जो इन केस ऑफ इमरजेंसी बहुत वाइटल होते हैं उसके बारे में इस प्लेटफॉर्म पे सीखते हैं।
सिम्युलेटर क्या आसान कर देता है, समय कम लगता है, वाई सिम्युलेटर और असली उसमें?
इसका फायदा ये है कि सिमुलेटर 24 घंटे चलाया जा सकता है। जो वीक ट्रेनीज हैं दे कैन लर्न एज मच एज दे वांट and it saves government the valuable money which is being spent on fuel.
जल में, थल पर, वायु में निर्बाध निरंतर जारी ही है इनके ऑपरेशंस। अभी के लिए इतना ही। कैमरा पर्सन सैयद मोहसिन और योगेंद्र सिंह के साथ मुझे दीजिए इजाजत। वंदे मातरम।
Session.
Thanks a lot, Abhishek. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar. We have received a few questions, and maybe we could take them first. Before the talk, we were telling Dr. Jaishankar that this is going to be a curated Q&A. And he smiled and said that curated Q&As are good, but sometimes they do look curated. So when I read the student's name, if you are there, if you could please stand up and identify yourself, unless you are already standing because the auditorium is full. So the first question from Shankar Vinayak, MBA first year. Hi, Shankar. Okay, maybe I can read out your question and then you can add. One of the principles of Indian culture is that of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. How do you think we might apply this principle to develop relations with Central Asian and African economies?
You know, would you like to add something more? No, okay. Look, I'm glad you brought that up for this reason. I was in New York this September. Every September, you know, all the 190 something countries of the world gather in New York. And I met roughly about half the foreign ministers who were there. And I cannot tell you how much our contribution, more than that, our, I would say, mindset during the COVID has impacted the world. There were countries in the Caribbean, countries in the Pacific, countries in Africa who came across, and you know, some of this, by the way, is in YouTube. I'd encourage you to look at it. And none of them are curated, I must tell you. You know, there were actually people who said, look, we want some platform, somewhere we want to say this, that our first vaccine came from you.
मेरे पास एक खोटा सिक्का है, वो पूरी रिस्क लेगा। अब्दुल करीम तेलगी।
अगर आगे बढ़ना है तो रिस्क लेना तो पड़ेगा ना डार्लिंग। जिसको अपना काम आता है उसको शॉर्टकट तो मालूम ही रहता है ना। तुम हो कौन?
तुम्हारी रूममेट।
रूममेट? तो रेंट आधा आधा।
ओके।
हल्के हल्के बाइट वाले कुरकुरे प्लेस खाओ और हल्के में लो।
अब हल्के हल्के बाइट्स वाले प्लेस पफ पहली बार आपके सालों से फेवरेट कुरकुरे मसाला मंच फ्लेवर में भी।
It came from you when you were still vaccinating your people. And we know there were others who were better off than you were, who actually probably had more vaccines per capita than you did. But you had the heart to give it to us. So, you know, we speak about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, world is a family, etc. The reality of that COVID era was also we saw the selfish side of the world. I mean, there were countries who clamped down on, you know, there was a big struggle in 2020 for PPEs and masks and ventilators and, you know, the initial set of medicines. There have been countries who are incredibly generous. There have been countries who were not. I'm not passing a judgment on those who may not have, you know, done all that they could have. I'm only saying today the feeling in the world about what we did. I think Indians need to know this, appreciate this fully, because sometimes we ourselves take good deeds for granted. You know, we live. You know, we're a big society. We are in the midst of our own debates. We most of the time are busy talking to ourselves, but there is an enormous goodwill today in the world, including, by the way, in Central Asia, Africa, Central Asia, other parts of the world. But put COVID aside for a moment. You know, you would be perhaps a little surprised to know how many countries in the world today we are active in sharing our development experiences. That when we speak today of digital delivery, or we say, okay, we are, our renewables has grown, or we are doing distance education, or we are propagating e-health. I mean, a lot of this has actually happened in different parts of the world. Again, in a way, perhaps it's not a story which often gets coverage at home. But over the years, I would say particularly in the last decade, our global footprint, India is seen today also as a provider of experiences, of best practices, of sometimes of resources, sometimes of opportunities. So when I speak about rising in the world, rising in the world is not just an accumulation of power. Smart power is also one where you make friends. I mean, the oldest management book in the world, Making Friends and Influencing People. A lot of diplomacy is about making friends and influencing people. And I would suggest to you, if you go through a lot of what the world says about us, you will find that very, very interesting.
Thank you so much. The next question from Abhilash Maji, second year MBA student. Hi, Abhilash. Given the change in the risk of global supply networks, how could India benefit from promoting entrepreneurship in defense and integrating it with innovative defense product manufacturing? There's a related question from a student from our MBA EX program, Deepthi Mishra. The question is about independent foreign policy where dependence is always there and inevitable in trade, defense, culture, and technology.
Let me, I think that's accurate. I don't think in this day and age, any country can say we are not dependent on something. Question is the extent of your dependence and what you do to mitigate it. My own view is over the, we went through a certain period, a certain model, you can say, from the 1950s till the early 90s. Okay, that model fell short, which is why we had the economic reforms, and then from last 30 years, we generally talk of being in a much more reformist era. But in this period, a country of the size of India, the bigger you are, actually, the more important it is that you are not hugely vulnerable to the world. You will never be autarkic, but you cannot be completely exposed for your very basic needs to the world. Perhaps if there is, and I say this as self-criticism, of a system, I mean, after all, I've been in that system for that whole period, that the system did not pay enough attention to building the deeper strengths, the supply chains, the domestic industries, the SMEs. And I contrast this because I've had the good fortune of living abroad, coming back to India, going abroad. So I do a lot of my contrasting is with other societies. When I look at a Japan, a Korea, or a China, and saw how at a time of economic growth, they also developed their own, domestic supply chains for a bulk of their requirements. I think there are big lessons to be learned there. And today, I would say there is this big corrective happening, that the government is very, very determined. There is an industrial policy which is aimed at building manufacturing. I mean, if you look at the percentage, the proportion of manufacturing in our economy, that's not the number we should have. It should be very much higher. So there is a big push today being given to manufacturing. And again, to do that, we need to attract manufacturing interest from abroad as well. Because our greatest resource is finally people. My sense is, when I look today at the big changes which are taking place, for me, I can see a big change taking place in the semiconductor industry. I was in the US recently last month, and I heard that from the Semiconductor Association there, that American companies alone employ 40,000 Indian engineers in design of chips. Now, we need, it's great if our people have global opportunity, but it's also essential that our entrepreneurship take full advantage of that. And I am a very strong votary of greater industrialization, of more manufacturing. I think this idea that we are naturally born service economy, very bluntly, is a cop-out. I think this is a way of rationalizing our failures. A country like us has to have a manufacturing muscle if we are to go up in the world.
No, thank you very much. Our VLM
Sorry,
students
and by the way, that applies especially to defense. And the interesting thing is, we've just come out of we just come out of this Defense Expo just now in Gandhinagar, and one of the readouts this time was how many Indian companies, especially Indian startups, turned up at Def Expo. And there are young people today who actually have produced things which are making our armed forces look up. And when we see the procurement of our own armed forces, domestic versus foreign, I can tell you there's a very big shift in the last few years. So I see a lot of possibilities there as well.
No, thank you very much. Yeah.
Etihad believes in going the extra mile, and it doesn't take that much. A touch of thoughtfulness, extra comfort, a little more taste of home, and a constant connection with the ones we love.
It's my daddy's birthday.
At Etihad, we go that extra mile to see people around us smile. An experience with just a little more. Etihad.
Radhakrishnan, Ishwari, and Swati are a few millet masters in Kanthalur. They are bringing a millet revolution with Lenovo's Work for Humankind initiative. They use Lenovo Tech to learn about farming techniques. Lenovo will support them with automation and tech-based market linkages to sell their products for the right value, ensuring these nutrition-rich superfoods reach your table.
Next from Nandan Goel, MBA second year. Nandan is asking, given your expertise in negotiations, what kind of challenges do you think are unique in inter-nation negotiations as opposed to corporate negotiations?
All of us negotiate all the time. Sometimes we don't know it, but we do. Okay. If you are a professional negotiator, in fact, the biggest problem you have even in your own family, your family suspects you are negotiating all the time. Now, the difference between international versus corporate. By corporate, I assume you mean domestic corporate. When you are negotiating, what is the big challenge? It's not only negotiating. Negotiating, competing in any way, is to read the mind of the other party. That's what it is. So before they make their move, you have anticipated their move. They have probably anticipated what you have anticipated, and you have to now figure out the next step. Okay. And it's true in negotiation, it's true in sports. If you watch a cricket match, the person coming in to bat is trying to figure out who's going to bowl, and the person going to bowl is figured out how the person going to bat is going to react to what he's going to bowl. So life is negotiation. But the challenge of negotiation is to understand the mind of the other party. And in a cross-cultural setting, I mean, what makes international negotiations hard is the other party is literally foreign to you. That their mental makeup is not something that is readily understandable. So what often happens is, you know, a lot of politicians are very, very comfortable negotiating at home because they are in their own milieu. They, you know, it's like playing in your own pitches, okay? You know the pitch backwards. You know every bowler. You know every player. Your field setting is perfect. But if you're on a tour abroad, that's why tours abroad are very challenging. Because now you're in an international setting. You know, you haven't got all the parameters. You haven't read the minds of that person. That's on international. On the corporate, since I had a brief incarnation there, I would say, you know, many of the same principles apply. Perhaps one difference is sometimes the stakes are much higher in the international ones. Sometimes. Need not be. Some corporate ones can be deadly serious as well. But I would, you know, if I were to take my 3 incarnations, if you would, the long foreign, the diplomatic incarnation, the short corporate interaction, and now my learning, I'm a student of politics practicing politics for the last 3 years. I would still say the international one is the most complicated because there are so many more variables that you have to digest and sort of get your algorithm prepared for.
Next from our MBA EX student, Atul Sethia. At the start of an MBA program, we are expected to change our outlook and make it more holistic in order to prepare for the second leg of our careers. We saw you transitioning from a foreign secretary to a foreign minister. What was your transitioning experience and what was the most important learning from it?
Just to fill in my curriculum with in between from foreign secretary to foreign minister, I did 1 year in the corporate world. Huh? Okay. And I mention it because I still maintain, I still maintain that was my MBA degree. You know, a year with the Tatas was the best MBA degree anybody could have got, at least the exposure that I had. You know, look, quite seriously, I would say there are a number of aspects to it. One between being, as a civil servant, I was the civil servant head of my ministry. But it's one thing to be that. It's something else to actually have the next layer of responsibility, which is you're now accountable in the cabinet, in the parliament, to the public, in a sense to the world for that particular vertical. So it is to, you know, sometimes nothing really prepares you for a transition except a transition. And you have to have the ability to learn on the job. I mean, you have to keep reminding yourself that there's so much out there you don't know. And if you have I would say the openness of mind to, today, someone at my stage and age, you know, 2 things happen to us, okay? One, you actually get smarter younger people. You know, there's a huge problem sometimes because you attribute, there's a sort of unconscious shall I say, inclination to correlate wisdom and experience. Sometimes actually smartness is non-experience. You know, you are not in that mode. The other part of it is when you move into a new domain or a different domain, and a political domain is very different. You know, there are so many more things which I mean, between me as foreign secretary and me as foreign minister, I have another set of variables which I didn't know or wasn't exposed to as foreign secretary, which I am exposed to by sitting in the cabinet, by meeting other ministers, by doing politics, which therefore, you know, give me a super holistic perspective in a sense, you could say. So it is a sort of constant challenge, but I would say if you enjoy doing what you do, and I think you can all see that I apparently do, but the other part of it is really you must have that in anything, you know, you must have that openness of mind, because even say when I was ambassador, you know, you arrive in a place, sometimes you've never been to that place before in your life. After you've been there 10 days, the rest of the system thinks that you should answer every possible question or problem relating to that place. So how do you parachute, you know, into something and immediately become operational? That's a great skill. And it's a skill you get by being very, very willing to listen and to learn from everybody, you know. I mean, I don't want to call it, it's not a humility, okay? It is actually an openness. The recognition that, you know, you should be, because at the end of the day, that osmosis has to work.
Next one from Professor Shomit Paul. Shomit asks that in the recently held Glasgow summit, India has committed to achieve net zero by 2070. What do you think are the major operational roadblocks specific to India to achieve this goal? And what might be the expected role of the financial sector in removing such roadblocks?
You know, I mean, you can call it roadblock. I would use the word challenge in a way. Look, it's not a problem specific necessarily to India. The biggest problem has been that at every COP, at every meeting, you get promises of finance. And it's really like Groundhog Day. You have that same conversation 1 year later at the next meeting. And if you look back from Kyoto onwards, the fact is that the promises of climate finance have never been taken seriously by the developed countries. You know, they keep saying it, then, you know, they will do very creative finance, creative numbers to show something. The reality is this, you know, the vehemence of the rhetoric has never been matched by putting money on the table. This, to my mind, is actually the biggest problem. And nowadays the new narrative is, you know, private sector will come and put money. Now the reality is the private sector will follow if that is the direction in which the world is moving. So ultimately that kind of green finance, climate finance, has to come from governments, has to come from multilateral development banks. It has to be government led so that private sector feels that's where it is moving and let me make a business out of it. So I feel that the very basic issue still, you know, is still sort of very unsatisfactory. It is not, I mean, in many ways, the developed world is stringing the developing world along. And there is mounting frustration, I think, in large parts of the global south on this.
Maybe we could open up for a couple of questions. Could you please pass the mic around? If you're asking a question, if you could please identify yourself and then ask a question. I could see many hands. We might be able to take 2 or max 3. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello, sir. I'm Rahul Kumar Marwal from the one-year MBA program. So you mentioned games between nations. How can we use our influence probably through Quad to make sure that the transfer of F-16 doesn't happen to one of our mischievous neighbor?
The transfer of F-16 has already happened, no?
So it doesn't happen in near future.
No, look, why I said the games nations play, partly it's the name of a famous book, but in a sense, I take games, competition. It's a similar sort of attitude. I mean, at the end of the day, people countries. It's all really about countries competing. I think rather than go the pathway which you put it, there is a issue which we have tried to bring out, which is that, if you look at the last 75 years, it has not served the world well by propping up a military dictatorship, by a country over-arming at the expense of its development, by then getting into a mindset where they do things which nowadays, civilized countries don't, which is, for example, support terrorism against their neighbors. So it's an entire package. I think it's important for the world to realize, and frankly, even for that particular country to realize, because it has not served that country well either. I mean, if you see, after all of us do performance evaluation of ourselves. I think if the countries of this region did their performance evaluation, there are some standout lessons out here. I think it's important for the world to realize that, and it's, clearly that's a messaging which we will keep sending out. Sometimes it has a greater impact, sometimes it has a less impact, sometimes people have their own angles or their games, if you would. So that's the way it is.
Serata Sofia.
What if you could make analyzing a big bank's data no big deal?
Go on.
Well, what if you partner with IBM and Red Hat, use a hybrid cloud solution to connect data across multiple systems globally, then analyze all that data with Watson?
Okay, but this needs to meet our...
Security standards? Yep.
Compliance standards?
Mm-hmm.
So they get the insights they need.
Yep.
In real time.
Check.
To make quick decisions.
Check.
And check.
That's the hybrid cloud solution IBM and a global bank created. What will you create? IBM. Let's create.
Good evening, sir. I'm Kamal Agarwal. I'm an auditor by profession. And actually, I'm myself going through a career transition as well. So,
welcome to the club.
Picked up a few things from you on this. My question is more, we spoke about looking at India leading the world, nation building, and all that. While looking at all this, how to deal with the internal issues that we have as a country today? More political, I'm alluding to. And I have two actually points to make over there, or other things to reflect on. One is, many times we see political gains more often than not take precedence over national interest. We see that happening so often. And the other is, how do you have a strong country building up when there isn't any strong opposition in the first place? We have the government, but there's not a strong opposition also to kind of keep the, a little balance around the functioning of the government. So how does all this kind of combine together to put India in a leadership position then?
Look, I would agree with you very much that it's important that we put national interest first, that the politics of the day should not trump in a sense, the larger interests of the nation. And clearly, that's you can say is a discipline or a approach that all politicians should have in the country. Now, it's obviously easy to say. It doesn't always get done. And I in my own remarks, I cited two examples. I mean, if you look at the whole Article 370 issue, I mean, let's be honest, other than the politics of the day, what was the reason for a temporary provision to continue so long? It was really the politics of the day. And the fact that we had such a messy issue there, I mean, the entire world used it for the last 75 years. So, and the other is really securing our borders. You know, that the politics of the day should not lead our borders to be vulnerable. I mean, I could come up with other examples. So I agree with you. I think to some extent we have to create a culture. To some extent, public opinion has to also, you know, the force of public opinion is a very powerful force. You know, politics responds to what is, politics may shape public mood, but believe me, public mood also shapes politics. I mean, as a relatively new entrant into this, I can tell you, when I look at people, you know, in my peer group and see how the sense of the public resonates with them, it is something which matters. On the issue, look, you know, you spoke about strong opposition. It's not the job of the government to create an opposition. Okay. But bear in mind, we are a very diverse country. You know, we are a diverse, pluralistic country. So sometimes I feel this obsession that, you know, somewhere we're all going in one direction. I don't think, to me, that's not the reality of this country. You know, this is a country, it has its own, it has its pluralism, it has its diversity, it has its checks and balances, it has its democracy. You get very overblown rhetoric, but I want you to step back for a minute and tell me, every time there's an election in this country, you know, everybody argues about it till the election results comes out, everybody follows the election result. Okay? Now, I can tell you a few places they still debate it. So my point is, I feel our politics, you know, our governance, our systems, we have a lot of room to grow. I'm not at all suggesting anywhere, you know, if I were grading it, I would be a little bit, you know, maybe strict about it. But the fact is, we also have many things we have done which we should be proud of. When I go around the world and I look at some of these debates around the world, I mean, in this country, if you look over the last 50, 60, 70 years, who can say that the life has not got better? You know, I look at how much more inclusive we have become, not in terms of tokenism, but inclusive in terms of prosperity, opportunities. I mean, I would say, if you were to take your own students, I guarantee you, your current cohort, the people in this room would be much more diversely, you know, diverse in their origin and in their, you know, in their education than it would have been 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And to me, that's proof that the system is working, system is delivering.
Maybe the last question.
Hello, sir. My name is Mahesh. My question is this: any special policy regarding
context of defense? But if you look today at what are the big imports of India, the big imports of India are oil and gas, electronics, and fertilizers. These are actually like right up there. The problem with fertilizers is a lot of them, you know, a big part of the fertilizer industry is directly linked to gas. Yeah. So there are limits to what we can make economically at home. But this is where diplomacy comes in. That it is today, for me, you know, when people speak foreign policy, diplomacy, it's not that airy-fairy stuff, you know, saying the right things at the right place, etc. To me, these are bread and butter issues. If I, at the end of my day, say today I have made sure that an Indian consumer is paying less for the petrol at the petrol pump. An Indian farmer is assured of fertilizers at the right time. An Indian household is getting its food and cooking oil at the right price. To me, these are really my benchmarks of what is successful diplomacy. And in the last few months, especially after the Ukraine conflict started, but even prior to that, we have been working very hard at diversifying our sources of fertilizers, at trying to reach long-term understandings with suppliers so that we stabilize it for our farmers. We've had a reasonable measure of success out there. I mean, there's still work to be done, but it is something very important because I do see a period where I'm absolutely convinced that this country will emerge actually as a serious agricultural exporter. You raise fertilizers. I actually put to you something very different. We are, this 2023 is an international year of the millets. If you look at the tradition, the history of millet production in India, it's a very long history. A lot of people ate millets till the new cereals came along. So there are big possibilities there, and definitely the interests of the farmer and making sure that fertilizers are available in equal, reasonable quantities is very important. I think that you said there's one more question.
Namaste, sir. Yeah, please.
Namaste, sir. Can I ask a question?
Just stand up and please. Yeah. This would be the final.
So can we take one question from the top? Yeah.
Okay.
Wait a minute. There's one here, then you.
I wanted to ask that you talked about globalization and technology and the global supply chains and how does it affect the current scenario. So considering our neighbor and considering that Taiwan is a mega hub for semiconductor fabs, what is our diplomatic stand regarding Taiwan?
Interest of time, shall I take that one also?
I think that would be nice. Yeah.
Okay. Namaste, sir. My question to you is that how does the mood swing of Uncle Sam affect our algorithm to deal with them?
That's it? Huh? Okay. Okay. Look, today there is a big semiconductor debate going on in the world. How do you hedge the risks in the semiconductor business? And where India is concerned, there is please. Where India is concerned, you would have noted that we've also started a semiconductor mission. Again, as I said, we can always say we should have done something before, but at least better we start doing it sometime. So there is a very, very big push today by the government to encourage Indian industry to sort of advance partnerships with foreign technology providers or foreign chip makers or foreign fab owners to see how much of that industry can come. Now, it's a very tough industry because it has very, very high specs. So we will have to upgrade the environment for an industry like this to come. It's not something which is very easy to do. But if you look at the last few years, if I had told you 10 years ago that, look, you would start getting smartphone manufacturing in India more or less at the rest, the same as the rest of the world, you would have taken it with more than a pinch of salt. But that is today happening. So we believe it can happen. We have a policy to make it happen. We have incentives to make it happen. But we understand also these, does require creating that kind of larger environment, not just a physical environment for production, but even a knowledge environment, an educational environment for the human talent for a semiconductor business. On the mood swings, well, look, it's like this. The United States in many ways is a very unique country. Now, I mean, in a way you can say everybody is unique. But when you are number one in the world, when you are the most powerful country in the world, then their uniqueness impacts everybody else. If some other country which in economic terms or power terms is number 150, and they have a bad day, maybe the rest of the world will not notice it. But when you are number one and things go this way or that way, it actually has global repercussions. And a lot of it is because you have in many ways the consensus within the American establishment has frayed over the last few years. That has been very visible. Some of it is their electoral cycle also, that they have a 4-year presidential cycle, but they have a congressional cycle of 2 years. So there is that. And then they have a separation of powers, which again is very unique. I mean, there are very few countries where the legislature has such an autonomous position from the executive. So the point is that there are a number of reasons why I would say managing the relationship with the United States requires a certain devotion of time, energy, understanding, chemistry, call it what you will. And I would say, last 20 years we've not done a bad job. I mean, I would give myself decent marks. Decent marks. Thank you, sir.
Etihad believes in going the extra mile. And it doesn't take that much.
It's my daddy's birthday.
At Etihad, we go that extra mile to see people around us smile. An experience with just a little more. Etihad.
Phillips.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar. We take back much to think about from your lecture today, and I'm sure it will inspire future graduates and others to introspect and perhaps recalibrate their choices to deliver better on the needs of the India to enable the country to lead the world. We'll now be opening the house for questions and answers. And for this, may I request Professor Bhaskar Chakrabarty, our Dean Academic, to please moderate the Q&A session.
Thanks a lot, Abhishek. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar. We have received a few questions, and maybe we could take them first. Before the talk, we were telling Dr. Jaishankar that this is going to be a curated Q&A. And he smiled and said that curated Q&As are good, but sometimes they do look curated. So when I read the student's name, if you are there, if you could please stand up and identify yourself, unless you are already standing because the auditorium is full. So the first question from Shankar Vinayak, MBA first year. Hi, Shankar. Okay, maybe I can read out your question and then you can add. One of the principles of Indian culture is that of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. How do you think we might apply this principle to develop relations with Central Asian and African economies?
Would you like to add something more? No, okay. Look, I'm glad you brought that up for this reason. I was in New York this September. Every September, all the 190 something countries of the world gather in New York. And I met roughly about half the foreign ministers who were there. And I cannot tell you how much our contribution, more than that, I would say, mindset during the COVID has impacted the world. There were countries in the Caribbean, countries in the Pacific, countries in Africa, who came across, and some of this, by the way, is in YouTube. I'd encourage you to look at it. And none of them are curated, I must tell you. There were actually people who said, look, we want some platform, somewhere we want to say this, that our first vaccine came from you. It came from you when you were still vaccinating your people. And we know there were others who were better off than you were, who actually probably had more vaccines per capita than you did. But you had the heart to give it to us. So, we speak about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, world is a family, etc. The reality of that COVID era was also, we saw the selfish side of the world. I mean, there were countries who clamped down on, there was a big struggle in 2020 for PPEs and masks and ventilators and, the initial set of medicines. There have been countries who are incredibly generous. There have been countries who were not. I'm not passing a judgment on those who may not have, done all that they could have. I'm only saying today, the feeling in the world about what we did, I think Indians need to know this, appreciate this fully, because sometimes we ourselves take good deeds for granted. We live, we're a big society. We are in the midst of our own debates. We most of the time are busy talking to ourselves. But there is an enormous goodwill today in the world, including, by the way, in Central Asia, Africa, Central Asia, other parts of the world. But put COVID aside for a moment. You would be perhaps a little surprised to know how many countries in the world today we are active in sharing our development experiences. That when we speak today of digital delivery, or we say, okay, we are, our renewables has grown, or we are doing distance education, or we are propagating e-health. I mean, a lot of this has actually happened in different parts of the world. Again, in a way, perhaps it's not a story which often gets coverage at home. But over the years, I would say particularly in the last decade, our global footprint, India is seen today also as a provider of experiences, of best practices, of sometimes of resources, sometimes of opportunities. So when I speak about rising in the world, rising in the world is not just an accumulation of power.